Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Kirkman. I'm an interpretive planner, and I'm coming to you from Salem, Massachusetts. I am your MC, technician, and moderator for this webinar, and I am a member of the Praxis Museum Projects group. We're here today to talk about the road to Bulgaria, the development, design, and delivery of Muzeiko, the America for Bulgaria Children's Museum. This is brought to you by the Praxis Museum Projects Group, and we are a network of museum professionals, each of whom brings an established and particular expertise to the process of creating museums, exhibitions, and cultural experiences of all types. The members of the group are leaders in their respective fields and belong to the Praxis Museum Projects Group in order to advance their individual expertise, learn from each other, and extend the benefits of that collaboration to their clients and the field as a whole. Today's webinar is offered by two Praxis members and the designer with whom they collaborated to bring Muzeiko to Bulgaria, the first children's museum in Bulgaria. And this museum opened in October of 2015. Along with us today, Praxis member Paul Orselli of POW, the Paul Orselli Workshop, who collaborated with Lee Skolnick to develop innovative and interactive exhibitions. We have Lee Skolnick at the center here, who was at the helm of the project from his New York-based Skolnick Architecture+Design partnership. His firm was the designer of the building and the exhibition experience at Muzeiko, and Paul was part of that exhibit development team. And finally, George Mayer, from also a Praxis member, who provides the perspective of the fabricator for today's conversation. He is vice president for Kubik Maltbie, an exhibition fabric company with offices in New Jersey, Toronto, and Amsterdam. So why this topic? We're going to talk about the challenges. We're going to actually share three things today. Talk about the challenges and rewards thanks to a project that is distant and different from many others. We're going to share the steps needed to create a very special museum and share some of the logistics and hurdles that this team encountered working distantly from the United States. And the goals for the presentation: to unpack the typically American idea of a children's museum and demonstrate how they applied this model to Southeastern Europe, to carry all of us through a concept design process as it progressed through all phases of design, through the full stages of the project. So you're going to get ushered through the process by this team of presenters, and discuss how the project's key goals, experiences, and content are reflected in the final design and the completed project. So where is Bulgaria anyway? If you consult this map, you'll see that the Republic of Bulgaria is located in Southeast Europe near Romania, Serbia, and Greece. Its capital city, the home of the museum project, is in Sofia, which is surrounded by beautiful mountains. At this point, I'm going to hand things over to Paul to get us started. If you develop questions or ideas for commentary, which we have time for at the conclusion of their formal presentation, please use the chat forum. If you're not familiar with that, there's a drop-down menu at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen where you can enable the chat group box, and you can enter questions at any time, and we have time at the end of the presentation to address those. So, Paul, take it away.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. If you can give me the next slide. This is really how things got started with Vesela Gorcheva. She's someone from Bulgaria who I met at a conference a number of years ago, over 10 years ago in Chicago. I was giving a presentation at the Children's Museum Conference, and as sometimes happens, after the presentation, people come up afterwards and want to speak with you. And I remember clearly Vesela sort of marching up the center aisle and sticking out her hand and saying hello and saying, "My name's Vesela, I'm from Bulgaria. We don't have any kinds of museums like this, and I hope one day you can work with us on getting a children's museum for Bulgaria." And I thought, wow, that's great. I had never even met anyone from Bulgaria before. And then after she walked away, I said, I'm never going to see this person again. I'm never going to end up in Bulgaria. But that is not true, because there I was just a year later And it turned out that they weren't starting immediately with a full-blown children's museum project, but instead they started with a sort of pilot project for 5 what they called children's corners, small interactive children's galleries in 5 existing museums all around Bulgaria, which actually in retrospect was probably an even better way of doing things than trying to launch a big children's museum in a place where people didn't really understand or have a context for children's museums. Next slide. So they developed interactive children's exhibits in museums that were not children's museums, outdoor history centers, archaeological museums, geology and mineralogy museums. And within the context of the topics that each of those host museums were built upon, they developed interactive children's exhibits that became super popular. As a matter of fact, this exhibit in Blagoevgrad, in a traditional archaeological and anthropological museum, on the first anniversary of its opening, little school children dressed up brought a birthday cake to the museum to celebrate the first anniversary of its opening. So needless to say, it was a big success. And it gave people in Bulgaria a sense of, wow, we do need a children's museum, and now we know what it is. So they launched a museum design competition, and I'll hand the mic over to Lee.
So hi, everybody. Yes, we were contacted by ABF, the America for Bulgaria Foundation, and they apparently, we learned later that they had approached 4 international teams. Actually, it turned out that the idea for doing a children's museum was partially due to the fact that one of the board members who lived in New York had visited some children's museums in the States with his grandchild, granddaughter, and one of them was a very small project we had done at the New York Historical Society called the Domena Children's History Museum. And it was as a result of that, and I guess some additional research that they did, that they invited us to be one of the competitors. So the first thing we did was, next slide, go to Bulgaria. It just happened to be the middle of the winter. And we got off the plane to about 4 feet of snow and higher snow drifts and met their team and hit it off really well and went to the site, which you see on the bottom of the screen. Now the site was in a university district, and there was a building on the property. And due to all sorts of local preservation laws, some part of the building had to remain intact. In the end, what we did was knock down most of it, kept the frame of one part of it, and that allowed us to be grandfathered in. So if you go to the next slide, here we are back. Now we've won the competition, and it's time to do our research. And whenever we do a project anywhere, whether it's in the States or abroad, the first thing we want to do is try and immerse ourselves in the local history, the local culture. We don't want to create museums. You know, these aren't franchises of the same thing, just plopped down in different parts of the world. We want the museum to feel like it's coming out of the local culture. And so we went along with them to all sorts of historic sites and to the countryside, which happens to be beautiful. And then we came back and put our thinking caps on, because it was clear that they wanted this museum to be not only the first museum to be built in the country in perhaps over 50 years, and not only the first children's museum ever in the country, but something that would be very comprehensive in terms of the subject matter. And so it was definitely science-based. And so we came up with this concept diagram, which really became the basis for everything we did afterwards. And we said, let's talk, we knew we had 3 levels to the building that we were constructing. So we said, let's have the bottom floor underground be about the past and about topics that would happen underground, like archaeology, geology, anthropology, paleontology. The main level on the ground level would be about today, the present, and that would be about the constructed world and the natural world. And then the upper level would be about the future. And so you're up in the sky, you're above the earth, and we're looking at space technology, space travel, astronomy. So there was a real, very integrated approach to the building and the exhibits where they could work together to create a narrative that would be accessible to all visitors. So as I said, this was the first new museum building in Sofia in 50 years. Of course, they had been under Soviet control before that. Here we're saying that it needed to be light, open, and transparent, not just versus traditional Bulgarian public buildings that are heavy, opaque, and foreboding to visitors, but really metaphorically, under Soviet rule, it was a very closed society, and we wanted to make sure that what we were doing felt very open, welcoming, transparent. At the same time, they were very keen on having this museum be state-of-the-art, 21st century, cutting-edge, international in flavor. And we said, well, we can do all that, but shouldn't it reflect the local culture? And they said, no, that's not that important. And we said, well, really, it is pretty important. And so you'll see in the design when we go through it that we took some liberties to make sure that it could only be in Bulgaria. The other thing was we had a very tight site, but we wanted to make sure that we used as much of the site as possible. And then finally, we were all committed to doing a sustainable building. So this building opened with the equivalent of a LEED Gold certification. So here's the basic kind of block diagram of the building. The taller piece in the back uses the framework, the concrete frame of the old chemistry lab that was on the property. The lower portion is the footprint of the original building, but it's actually a completely new structure. We can go forward. So this shows you the site, and you can see the outline of the building, the parking, but we used every square inch of site that we had for a science play area, for planting, for what we called a rain garden, with specific plants that bloomed and blossomed because of rain. We had an outdoor dining terrace, and we had an outdoor gathering area. So every piece of real estate that we could exploit for the program, we took advantage of. We then said, it's great that everybody wants to have a signature building, but the fact is that the way we like to design is from the inside out. And so the exhibition program was going to really dictate the architecture of the building. And so on the lower level, as I mentioned, these were just very early look and feel images. We were looking at archaeology, paleontology, and geology, and all the interactives would be based on those topics. On the next level, up on the ground level, it would be about the present day. So it would be about the built environment, the local culture, the natural environment, and also this was the area where we would do an early childhood exhibit specifically geared to 0 to 5-year-olds, because they always need a protected area and they need an area that is close to the entry so they don't have to traipse through the entire building to get to that specific area. And then on the upper level, we're dealing with the future and actually with the roof as well. So we can go forward. So what happens next? You start to turn concepts that come out of script development, conceptual outlines, research into content. And we had Paul, I don't remember how many, we had about 60 content specialists that were all gleaned from Bulgarian academia. So we had this tremendous group of content resources to kind of corral and shepherd. Of course, all of them wanted to have everything they had ever learned in the museum, and we had to be the kind of monitors and at times the bad guys to say, well, we can get this much content in, but not more than that. As a result of all of this concept development, we did those rough sketches you saw a moment ago, and then they evolve into vision renderings. And these are really, really important for selling the idea to the stakeholders, for selling it to the donors, which was the foundation in this case. And also they set the basis for the design and technical drawings that we do later. So this icon in the center of the museum, this tree, became extremely visually, physically, and conceptually central to the entire experience. We can go on. These are both the lower level on the bottom, which was about the archaeology and geology, and the very upper level, which was about high technology, communications, and space travel.
I was going to say another great thing about those images is that it doesn't matter whether you speak English or Bulgarian to appreciate them.
That's absolutely true. You know, the visual and the architectural seem to span culturally in a way that very often our conversations did not achieve the communication goals that we had. But once we saw images, everybody could speak the same language. So then, you know, we handed over, after we get to what we call design control drawings, which were essentially very, very accurate pictures of what we want to achieve. We handed over to the exhibit fabricator, and we've had a very long and fruitful collaboration with Maltbie for, oh God, George, I don't know, 25 years or so.
I would say something like that, yeah.
As we did with Paul Orselli in many projects before him. So this was definitely, you know, a family operation.
Right, and thanks, Lee. So I'm George Mayer. I'm with Kubik Maltbie. I'm the VP of Business Development, and our work is 100% exclusively museums. We were brought into this project, or we were introduced to this project, I would say sometime in March of 2013, when we were invited to do a round of pricing and submit a proposal. And then based on that, I think we were probably one of 6 firms that were invited to do this. Based on that, we got shortlisted and then were selected to do the project in late April of 2013 after an interview with the Skolnick team and the Muzeiko team. We did another round of pricing, and then in June of 2013, it was announced that we were going to be awarded the project, and it was very exciting, but we were a little bit terrified because how do you do a project in Bulgaria? Fortunately, we had the good support and encouragement of the Skolnick team, and after the award announcement was made, we were asked to make a trip to Bulgaria to do some exploration. And the exploration really was about the idea of bringing in local craftspeople, artisans, subcontractors, and local folks who could carry on after we had left Bulgaria, after the installation was done. So our first stop in this on this trip was at a place called New Bojana Studios. So many of you may or may not know that Bulgaria is one of the hotbeds of film production in the world. Over 400 films have been made, feature films have been made in Bulgaria. So they have already in place a great stable of artists and scenic fabricators, which we were going to need. Next slide, Matt, please.
Yep.
These are some photographs of the day that we visited the studio and before we went into their scenic shop. So we did this for a couple of days and visited the studio and then visited with other crafts firms and fabrication firms, and these days all ended with new friends and good dinners, as they should. So, as we got started, we started producing shop drawings. Next slide. And in the period of about 14 months, we produced over 300 shop drawings for the exhibits for this project. And Lee's probably looking at me thinking, how did we ever review all those shop drawings? We did. Next slide, please. You've seen this sketch already, but this was the iconic tree, this signature piece of the exhibit tree in the museum. So we started with several sketches. This is a very early conceptual sketch. Did some engineering, found a fantastic local fabrication partner that we worked with to engineer and fabricate the interactives for this iconic tree. Next slide, please. And it turned into this fantastic sculpture. Next slide. That begins on the very lower level with the root system and everything that is under the tree, and then the first level, or first and second levels, which contains all the interactive exhibits. Next slide. Some more of those guys. So anytime we build exhibits for science centers or children's museums or any museum that has interactive exhibits, we do proof of concept prototyping and then hard prototyping in the shop. These two images are of one of the Skolnick staff on the left side and the director of the museum, who came all the way from Bulgaria to start inspecting exhibits in the shop. So prototyping is a big deal with us. Here's a great example of why prototyping pays off, or how prototyping pays off. This is an exhibit in an area of the museum called Bulgaria Rocks. And Bulgaria Rocks was so named because the geological formations in Bulgaria and in around Sofia were very significant, and it was part of the design concept to point this out to the visitors. So there's an exhibit called the Mining Sorter. This is a sketch from the Skolnick office to illustrate what this exhibit was going to look like. Kids take a foam boulder or a foam rock, put it on the sorter, crank the handle, the rock travels up the conveyor and gets sorted out based on its size to show different kinds of rocks. So next slide, Matt, please. Here's a shop drawing. We won't dwell on this too much. Next slide. So often we bring in school groups or young children to play test the exhibits. And here's a photograph of a 4.5, 5-year-old little guy who couldn't for the life of him turn on this conveyor. And so we knew immediately that this was not going to work. 4-year-old has to be able to turn the crank in order to get the rocks to go up the conveyor. So just as a little bit of play testing with this little guy told us that we needed to change the gearing mechanism in the crank. Very simple. Next slide. And here are the notes that were taken during that session. And that got turned into this is the finished exhibit in the shop before it got installed. Next slide. And there it is in the museum after installation, being used by 2 kids. So good experience, very valuable exercise. So Lee, maybe you just want to talk a little bit about the design of the building bot. And
yeah, well, one of the interpretive approaches we took in the built environment area was to acquaint kids with the systems of a building by relating it to the systems of the human body. So, you know, whether it's respiration, circulation, skeletal structure, etc. So we had a concept for this and we had activity ideas, but before taking it very far, we wanted to start prototyping the activities before we finalized the design.
Next slide, Matt, please. So taking off on that, this is our shop drawing for the building bot. One of the shop drawings. There were many. This is just a representation of the number of shop drawings. And After the shop drawings were done, we thought it would be really helpful to build what we thought of as a three-dimensional sketch. So this is just a plywood structure that represents the building bot in its height and width and dimensional form, but that incorporates some rough prototypes of the interactive exhibits that were going into the unit. On the image, oops.
Sorry, I jumped.
That's all right. The image on the right-hand side of your screen shows our technician, our director of interactive exhibits, Scott Reeves, working with Lee Skolnick's, or the Skolnick office's lead designer, Scott Briggs, who came down for a shop visit to explore how these things work with our interactives department. Okay, now, here we go. So this, again, were the notes that were taken in the shop, and then if you click your button there, Matt, there we go. Notes taken in the shop on the left side turned into a record set of notes that were taken during the interactive review at the shop. Next slide, please. And there's our friend, the building bot, on site in the finished space. Pretty handsome fellow he is. Next slide. Here's a rear view of the building bot's legs. Lee, maybe you want to pick up on this a little bit, just to talk about.
Well, so here we've been able to show how these systems trail through a building. As I said, in reference to the kinds of things that come through your body, whether it's energy, hydration, power, which are similar to the nervous system. There was a corollary for each of the characteristics of building infrastructure and human biology.
Okay, there we go. Some exhibits from the Uncovering the Past on a very lower level. You can see that there's a lot of scenic fabrication in this project, and the folks at New Bayana Studios came in very handy, and they were great to work with. There were no communication problems, language differences or anything. It was a very gratifying, rewarding project. Exploring the present. And then the next slide, please. Discovering the future at the upper level. Next slide. Lee, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we felt very strongly about was, as I mentioned earlier, that we use every square inch to its greatest effect. So when we designed the staircases, we thought, well, this is a great place to educate kids about fitness and how many calories you use up doing various things that kids do. So, we had a graphic language that we used throughout the museum that carried through to even places like the stairwells. We also did, on the lower right, we had designed a temporary exhibit gallery so that the museum could have changing exhibits. And they asked us to design the inaugural exhibit, which was about innovation and invention. And so we worked on that with Maltbie as well. And this is meant to travel to other places around Bulgaria, so there would be outreach, and not everything was just in the museum itself. And then we really, just go back for 1 second, we totally programmed the roof of the building. So it's a green roof, and I don't mean the green that's in the foreground here. We have a good half of the roof is planted. We also have solar collectors, which are interpreted as power sources. And then these little mountains that project through the building became useful areas for gathering spaces in this climbing wall.
Okay.
So we can run quickly through the building construction. I mean, it's just interesting to see what was on the site before on the upper left there, and then you see them demolishing the entire one-story structure. Let's see, 27th. So that was all the same day. So in the course of about 5 hours, the whole wing was gone, and we were able to start construction. But as I say, we maintained the rear wing in its skeletal form because that allowed us to get the kind of permits that we needed to do the project. And now you see the building really under construction. A very significant feature in the building is, and you see the framework in the middle there of the left-hand side, these three structures we call the little mountains. And this is back to this whole concept of making sure that there was something uniquely Bulgarian about the project, even though the client wasn't that supportive of it. Sofia is surrounded by 3 mountain ranges. And so we created these 3 little mountains to be referential to those mountain ranges. And then we sheathed them with patterns, which you'll see in a moment, that are indigenous artisanal patterns from Bulgarian culture. So the red one is an abstraction of embroidery patterns. The green one in the foreground is an abstraction of glazed ceramic patterns. And the wood-looking one on the top refers to wood carving. And you'll also see in the body of the building that there's a tremendous amount of glass. So this goes back to this whole idea of transparency, and we're not hiding anything, and everything that we do inside can be viewed outside, and you're welcome to come in. We're inviting you into this experience. We're not sort of keeping you out, which was the former culture that they were dealing with. So just a few slides of the finished building. On the upper left, you see the main entrance, which is actually through this little wooden mountain. You can see on the right side on the top, a view into the cafe, which is very, very popular, and another one on the bottom left of the cafe. Oh, yes, opening day. And this was a big deal in Bulgaria, I have to tell you. Up on the upper right is the mayor of Sofia, but the prime minister was there, cabinet members, other ministers, and of course our combined team, Bulgarian and American team. And then at night there was a whole fireworks display. But on the upper left, they had this marching band. And several months before the opening, I had written a theme song for the museum just for fun. And I had sent it over to the director. And there we are at the opening, and this marching band starts coming from down the street, and they're playing the theme song. And it was just an unbelievable moment. Everybody had tears in their eyes. And including, this is very important. Paul brought this up earlier, and so did George. America for Bulgaria Foundation was very interested in empowering local talent and local workers to be able to do this themselves next time. So we were there to do a project, but also to help them understand how to do it themselves, and to see the workers, the contractors on the building, who during the construction would always say to us, "This is not possible. This is not possible." And we kept saying, "No, it really is. It's possible. We can make this happen." And we did, and they did. And to see them all dressed up, showing their kids and grandkids what they had done was truly a moving experience.
So thank you very much for that deep dive into the creation of Muzeiko. We do have a few questions that are coming into the chat forum. If you have questions, you can posit those in the chat forum at any time. I'm going to manage those, and I will offer those questions to the panel here. Our first question is about travel costs and how those contributed to the overall cost of the project. Can you comment on kind of how the budget and cost for this project differed from maybe a domestic project, and related to that, second part of the question about a per square foot cost, how that might compare to a typical US-based project.
Well, I can answer, at least from our experience on the travel. You know, we did, when we agreed on a fee, we projected forward a number of trips and the number of days for each trip. So it was incorporated into the budget from the very beginning, which is not to say that it was inexpensive. It was, you know, getting to Bulgaria is not like getting, you know, up to Albany from New York. You know, it's a significant trip. You have to change planes, whether it's through Germany or London or Paris. There were all sorts of connections, but you know, there was definitely an expense involved. Once we were in Bulgaria, everything is quite inexpensive, and all of those costs were picked up by the client directly. So we didn't bill for expenses in Bulgaria because they took care of those. So it was really the plane travel. In terms of the price per square foot, to build the building, the price per square foot was roughly a third to a half, not a third to a half less, but a third to a half of what it would cost us to build a building in the US, and probably even cheaper when compared to places like New York, Chicago, LA, Miami, which have even higher per square foot costs. I'll let George talk about the fabrication costs, but those, you know, they had to understand would not necessarily be subject to the same deep discounts that they have on the architecture.
I'm just doing a little of, let's see here. Okay, so what I would say is that the initial part of the trip, the client covered our travel expenses as well. Hotels, meals, maybe not airfare. But the cost of the exhibits came out to be about $335 a square foot. And I think the costs were somewhat offset by the fact that we used a lot of subcontract providers in Bulgaria whose pricing was much less than you know, our own shop prices or prices that you would find for exhibit fabrication in the States. So it worked out to be about $333 a square foot, which, given the complexity of the exhibits and the level of interactivity, was a very good price.
I think on the building, a building like this in the US would be a minimum of $450 or more a square foot, and it could be a lot more depending on where it's built. I think this building came in around $200 a square foot using Bulgarian labor. A lot of the materials, particularly the specialty materials, did have to be imported from other places, from Europe, not from the States or the Far East. But even so, you know, Bulgaria, for those of you who don't know, is unfortunately the poorest country in the EU, not to mention in some cases the most corrupt. We were completely shielded from any corruption by the foundation, which operates completely above board, transparently and honestly. So we had absolutely no problems doing work there or working with the contractors or the fabricators, because everybody knew that the foundation was, you know, squeaky clean. So, you know, it was, for us, I think I can say for all of us, it was a great experience because we were very well, you know, they appreciated what we were doing, and they realized that they had a responsibility to kind of police the project, and they did.
I'll just say that since I was just there this past summer, that all the exhibits in the building still look really great considering how well used they are. So it's not just how much things cost, of course, but how well they are loved and used and how well they continue to hold up. So,
And they take care of that building and the exhibits like a precious jewel. I mean, I've been back there many, many times. We continue to do work in Bulgaria. We're doing work even now. And so we go back there frequently, and the place looks brand new. It's fantastic.
George, can we come back to you about, you mentioned your subcontract arrangement with some Bulgaria-based fabricators. Can you talk about your role in managing quality, providing guidance to ensure that the design was, that the intent was maintained and the follow-through from the design vision? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, we didn't do that on our own. We frequently made trips with Scott Briggs, who was Skolnick's lead designer. So our project manager would travel with Scott, and together they would visit subcontractors' shops and offices. But it was a very interesting process in that, again, you know, where you might think that the language, there could be something lost in translation, literally. Everybody was on board and really seemed to want this to turn out well and gave us their full cooperation. And, you know, it doesn't mean there weren't some things that needed to be corrected or redone slightly or whatever to achieve the design intent. But overall, it was a very good process, considering the distance and considering the language, the barrier.
How did you decide what to keep in your shop and what to parcel out?
Well, we knew that we wanted to have the greatest degree of control over the interactive fabrication because those things are the most vulnerable, most likely to break down. If something was going to go sideways, it would be with an interactive. So we knew that if we had control over it, at least we could control the quality of it to a greater extent than we could if it was done, you know, 5,000 miles away, 6,000 miles away. So it was mostly the interactive stuff that we did in-house. And of course, all the shop drawings and quality control were a big deal on this project.
Those are the questions from the chat forum. Unless there are any other closing comments, I would like to, we're at 45 minutes, so that's
yeah. I just wanted to just say briefly in the closing moments here something that Lee alluded to, that we continue to work on projects in Bulgaria, which I think is a testament to this entire process. I mean, you could look at the difficulties in terms of the distance or the language or the culture, but I think this was a really special project, and we're fortunate to continue to work on projects with folks in Bulgaria.
Yeah, we've been asked back by the foundation specifically. Actually, while we were, I think before we finished the museum, they asked us to do some work at the university, the law school. So it was straight architectural work. And then after that, we came back, they asked us to help renovate the State Children's Hospital, which we finished a couple of years ago. And we're presently working in the city of Plovdiv, which is the ancient capital of Bulgaria, on a visitor center over a 4th century Roman basilica, which is filled with extraordinary mosaics. So, and that's going to open on April 2nd. So I don't know if there's something beyond that. I hope there is, but it has been, you know, I failed to mention in the beginning, George reminded me, we were contacted in 2012, and the museum opened in 2015. So when George says, you know, they were contacted in 2013, that makes sense because we were, you know, at a point in the design process where we hadn't designed everything. But one of the things that we felt was very important was that the fabricator be on board before we finished our design, so that they could work with us directly to troubleshoot, value engineer, all the things that you're all familiar with, rather than bid this out. We didn't bid it out in a traditional way. We looked at firms competitively and then chose a firm early enough on that they could become our partner throughout the rest of the process.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Unless there are any other comments from the panel, I think this concludes our January webinar. Paul, do you want to say anything about the timing of our next Praxis broadcast?
Well, stay tuned. This one, like our previous one, will be recorded and will be viewable on the Praxis YouTube channel. And then we're trying about every other month to have another one. So stay tuned.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.